Yeah, okay, then it's great. Okay, so hi, thank you. My name is Romain Mauger, and I am assistant professor of energy law at the University of Groningen, in the north of the Netherlands. And today I would like to use these few minutes to discuss essentially degrowth and energy law, right? Within the framework or the idea of making one more step towards an ecological civilization. Just moving this away. Yes, and how to see how degrowth could be embedded within EU energy law. So without further overdue, in terms of the outline of this presentation, first I will say some words about degrowth itself to introduce it in a nutshell. Then explaining what about degrowth in the law, is it already being included or not? Then a few words about the impact of energy on planetary boundaries. Why is it so important to consider and to tackle energy as a fundamental issue in this case? Then I will enter really into the heart of this study, which is about degrowth in EU energy law. Where is it? Which provisions can be considered as compatible, and what could be changed? And I will elaborate on why, aside from changing everything essentially. And I will have finally some words about the idea to elaborate slightly on how to include rights of nature in EU energy law, and if this would actually help fostering degrowth, before a few words of conclusion. So degrowth in a nutshell. Degrowth can be defined as a planned reduction of energy and resource use designed to bring the economy back into balance with the living world in a way that reduces inequality and improves human well-being. You have a few different definitions around, but this one really takes into account the most important aspects and is, I would say, widely accepted in its main aspects. So indeed, once it's about consuming less resources, but two, doing it in a fair way, so addressing inequalities and improving the human well-being. It builds on the second law of thermodynamics, which means that this law stands for during every production process, some energy is lost, right, in the form of waste or heat. As complete recycling of energy is impossible, we have biophysical limits to growth, and these are binding. Each time we use energy, we lose a part of this energy, and as energy and other resources are limited, then we necessarily have boundaries. So limitless growth, economic growth is impossible, right? This infinite, infinite economic growth is impossible, and even the dematerialization of the economy consumes resources itself. It's not a solution per se. This theory of degrowth also builds on the rebound effect or Jevons paradox, which means that even if we are doing, if we have gains in terms of energy efficiency, when we have innovations that will allow us for the same level of services to get more, we see that as a consequence, then people use more of these services, and therefore the gains in terms of energy are being lost because of this change in patterns of use. Degrowth in the law. Well, I do not know about any case of a legal instrument that is explicitly using the concept of degrowth, right? As a difference of other concepts that are relatively similar, once more to an extent, such as just transition, which have started to be implemented into the law, but degrowth has not. Also, I have to say that I have not studied this aspect really in depth, but of all the dozens of papers I've read on degrowth, I've never found such example of a provision that explicitly goes into this. In the literature, you can find some examples that I provide here of essentially having degrowth and the law in the same research. These are only few, as you can see. These are all the papers I could find, and the last one be actually one of mine that I published a couple of months ago as part of the book. But otherwise, we don't have really that much. It's more something that has been developed from other fields of social sciences, economics, and so on. Now, about the impact of energy on planetary boundaries. Indeed, why tackling energy is a priority when talking about planetary boundaries. First, because of its importance, of course, for climate change, right? Because energy consumption is by far the first source of GHG emissions worldwide, approximately 3/4 of the human emissions. We can see this with this climate change here boundary that is already over the safe operating space of Earth. But energy is also important for other types of planetary boundaries. And here we can refer to, for example, the biosphere integrity, where you have this element of extinctions per million species per year, because a part of the land use change, which actually is impacting so much species, is for the extraction of energy resources. Land system change, which is here, we're also in the red, freshwater use for cooling when we are producing energy with different types of energy, well, especially with thermal production or nuclear production. So all of these elements are being impacted, at least to an extent, by the by energy, the production and use of energy. Now, entering into really the heart of this issue, which is degrowth in EU energy law. Where does it appear? Well, actually nowhere. There is no provision in EU energy law, so the different directives and regulations and all the norms within EU that are dealing with energy that are really integrating degrowth into them. So that's the issue. Essentially, the main rationale behind and within energy law is green growth. You can see more into this article, but essentially green growth is about decoupling GHG emissions, so we want them to go down and sufficiently, and in general environmental bads, from economic growth, which with the theory would still go up. So we would like to have economic growth without more GHG emissions. The problem is that this is very much debated, and in many papers it is being shown that this is not possible, at least not to the extent and at the speed that is needed. Now, this rationale of green growth appears in the EU treaties, which are the equivalent of a constitution for the EU, and in different directives and regulations, right? For example, in the Treaty on the European Union, Article 3, which sets the fundamental objectives of the EU, we can see that economic growth is one of these fundamental objectives, but it has to be, at the same time, it has to integrate a high level of protection and improvement of the quality of the environment. It's at the same time economic growth and protection of the environment, which means, at least to an extent, this issue of decoupling and therefore green growth. If we take an example of a regulation that is quite recent, the European Climate Law from 2021 in its recital 2, so where we have the elements, the main goals of the regulation being presented, it clearly states that economic growth is decoupled from resource use towards the future. That's one of the objectives of this regulation. So that's typically a green growth rationale. Therefore, if we don't have any explicit mention of degrowth, and in general, EU energy law goes towards the notion of green growth, the idea of this research is to look for existing provisions that, without being expressly into the degrowth idea, can still be compatible with degrowth. The idea being to really identify these provisions so that we can actually start harnessing them and moving towards a degrowth concept, while without having to basically change completely all of the law. Because first, I don't know if it will happen and when, and secondly, it will take so many years, and we don't have time, essentially. So already pinpointing at the relevant or potentially useful provisions, I think would allow us to go one step forward. So in this case, this study is focusing on a set of laws, directives, and regulations, because I couldn't study all of EU energy law, it's too big. First, it's focusing on the 2019 Electricity Market Directive, on the 2018 Renewable Energy Sources Directive, plus its existing process for the recasting of this directive, the 2012 Energy Efficiency Directive, which was slightly amended in 2018, plus as well the recast process that is being run at the moment. And for this recast process, it comes from two packages that are updating regulations and adopting new legislation as well, which are the 2021 Fit for 55 package, and 2022 Repower EU plan. So the idea of the first one is to reach 55% of less 55% less GHG emissions by 2030 in comparison to 1990, if I'm not wrong. And the 2022 Repower EU plan is about updating some of these elements of this proposal after the start of the Russian invasion and the impact it had on the provision of energy. And with these different texts, I can cover quite some large chunks of the energy chain that goes from production to final consumption. So which provisions are compatible within the 2019 Electricity Directive? First, you have to know that the Electricity Directive, basically what it does is it organizes the electricity market. So it's really about market rules. Okay, it mainly revolves around organizing its liberalization and to promote competition. So it's definitely not about degrowth. However, we have a few existing provisions that could definitely fit within a degrowth rationale. First, we can refer to the provisions about the protection of customers, and especially vulnerable customers, to ensure that they have access to sufficient energy when they're into energy poverty, for example, such as here in Article 28. And a very important one provision, it's about a degrowth compatible actor, which are the citizen energy communities, or CEC. These are energy communities, okay, and they have been legally recognized in the 2019 directive, and their primary purpose is to provide environmental, economic, or social benefits to their members or shareholders, or to the local areas where they operate, rather than to generate financial profits. So it allows people to get organized together into the energy and to act into the energy sector to provide services, produce energy for themselves, get together to provide energy efficiency improvements, etc., etc. And the final idea you can read here is not only to generate financial profits. So these are two of the main ones that I could find really that can be considered as degrowth compatible. Looking at the 2018 Renewable Energy Directive, what it essentially does is that it sets renewable energy targets and it provides support for the development of these renewable energy sources. It also has a couple of degrowth compatible provisions. For example, one can refer to the sustainability criteria for the production and import of bioenergy within the EU, which essentially target bioenergy to be sure that they are not produced while causing deforestation or other types of land uses changes that are mostly causing massive GHG emissions and biodiversity destruction, right? So this is a rather degrowth compatible measure. And here is as well a degrowth compatible actor, which are this time Renewable Energy Community, or REC, and which is basically really similar to the CEC. So the citizen energy community that we have seen just before, just that it is in two directives because they have some slight differences, and this one definitely is based on renewables under any form, including fuels and gases, etc. While for the citizen energy community of the previous directive, it focuses on electricity sector, not including gases and liquids and so on. The third directive, so the Energy Efficiency Directive, it sets targets, right, in energy efficiency improvement, the idea being to use more efficient technologies to consume less energy for the same level of service, right? And it has a very degrowth compatible mechanism, which is a hard cap on total energy consumption, which was set for 2020 when this directive was adopted firstly in 2012. And this idea of a hard cap, a hard limit, we cannot go over this, is really integrated into many policy proposals about degrowth. Now, I've been also looking into the recast process, as I've said before, of these different directives, right? Because they are being changed now towards 2030 and towards net zero by 2050. In this case, we have a very interesting focus on energy savings, especially from the Repower EU plan proposed in May last year after the Russian invasion, right? And not solely on energy efficiency. So the idea is to say, okay, we don't have the time to wait for energy efficiency improvements that will give us some gains on the medium term. we need energy savings now. So we need behavioral changes now with people consuming less energy. And this is very, very, very degrowth compatible as well, to just change our behavior, what we really do. In addition to this, and studying the elements, the proposed revision of the RES directive first, well, it sets new higher RES targets by 2030, 45% of renewables in the total energy provision by them. But we have no new degrowth compatible actors or mechanisms within this proposed recast of the directive. And it is even more linked to the rationale of the 2019 E-directive and therefore to markets and competition, right? I also have to say that the 2019 E-directive is not being recast within this process, meaning that the law as it is for the electricity market will remain for the few years to come, possibly towards 2030. So we also have to take this into account. When it comes to the Energy Efficiency Directive for its recast, well, there's a new cap on energy consumption that was set by 2030 with a lower level of total energy use that is being permitted by 2030, right? The MTOE stands for million tons of oil equivalent, and you see it in primary energy, which is really the hard, like the oil that we are using versus the final energy when it comes through different processes to the final use of the energy, right? And we still have some way to go because in 2020, as you can see, we have more or less 250 MTOE above the level that we have to reach now in 7 years from now. In addition to this new, more stringent cap, we have a very interesting principle, which is called the energy efficiency first principle. Okay, so this one was actually included into the directive in 2018, but there was nothing, not even a definition. Now it is being defined and really implemented into the directive. It means that energy efficiency must be the first option in planning and investment decisions when setting new rules for supply side and other policy areas. Meaning that if we need at some point, either the planning organized for the energy system in 2030, before saying, okay, we need more wind turbines and solar panels, etc. First, we have to say, first, how can we implement more energy efficiency, right? So we don't consume that much energy. And then when we have used this option, then what can we use in terms of producing more energy? But first, let's save energy. So it is also very much degrowth compatible, right? And this applies to public procurement by all administrations. And before that, we had the start of such provision, but we had some conditionalities in terms of cost effectiveness, technical and economic feasibility. Now in this public procurement, first it's about energy efficiency, and cost effectiveness, for example, doesn't matter. So it has to be first the most efficient technology that is being used. And there is also into the proposal some focus on vulnerable customers and social housing in terms of implementing these changes. Now, based on all of this, what could be changed actually within EU energy law? I said, aside from, well, changing everything essentially. Well, first, we could facilitate the development of existing degrowth compatible actors, the energy communities I've mentioned, because they have a status, but they're still very much a niche actor. Right? They need more support to become a higher level actor that is being more used by the people. We can set more ambitious renewables and energy efficiency targets, especially the hard caps on energy consumption. We should also provide more social support to accompany these targets. And we should place the energy efficiency first principle, which is very interesting, but under an energy sufficiency first principle. Energy efficiency being, as said, very much based on the technological process to consume less with the same level of services. Energy sufficiency is about just consuming less, especially by changing our behavior. So we should do this first before relying on technology to consume less. Based on all of this, what about including the rights of nature in EU energy law to foster degrowth? Well, actually, better protecting nature by granting rights to nature may contribute to limit its exploitation, right? It would allow to place a supply side limit on the extraction of the resources, Firstly, they wouldn't be extracted because we give rights to the nature, and therefore we don't have to place only limits on the consumer side, as I've explained with these hard caps on total consumption. So that's a very interesting idea in this sense. Also, the rationale of rights of nature also fits with the idea of planetary boundaries that we have to live within. And degrowth, the idea of degrowth is to bring us back within this safe operating space. So both ideas are very much in line in this case. And I'm coming to the conclusion because I'm just reaching the end of my time. So degrowth is a planned reduction of the consumption of resources, right? While reducing inequalities and improving well-being. EU energy law follows the green growth logic, unfortunately, and it would need a deep change to really fully align with degrowth. However, some existing elements within EU energy law are already degrowth compatible, such as these hard caps, protection of vulnerable customers, and so on. Therefore, it may be possible to harness these provisions to already push towards degrowth without losing any more time that we do not have. Thank you very much for your attention, and sorry for the extra minutes.